Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 13 tonight is where we'll start. Now this is part 2 of principles from Proverbs 14. And so divided up the chapter into thirds for the most part, give or take a fraction for next week, but not quite thirds. You can't do that. But tonight we'll cover the second third of Proverbs 14, Lord willing. And let's get started with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the day that you've given, for the service this morning and being able to be at the nursing home this afternoon. And thank you for the time to gather tonight. And Lord, in a day where Sunday evening worship and preaching is getting fewer and farther between in so many churches and many communities, Lord, we thank you that we can still meet and that we can freely meet, and thank you that there are still people who make it a point, a priority to come and meet and worship and for the preaching of your word. And so Lord, we just pray tonight that it would be beneficial, it would be profitable, that you would work in each and every one of our hearts the way that you see fit. And in this time of going through different principles, these different verses, certainly covers a lot of ground. But Lord, help us take these tidbits of truth and hide them in our hearts to be used in our lives for your honor and glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Verse 13. Verse 13 says, "Even in laughter the heart is sorrowful, and the end of that mirth is heaviness." Even in laughter, the heart is sorrowful. How can that be? I thought, if somebody's smiling, that means they're automatically happy. Their heart is happy. No, that does not happen. That is not always the case. Now, times when people are laughing, they might truly be of a joyful heart, and they're laughing because they've got no burdens on their heart at that moment in time. But, it's been said about on one of the, downsides of social media is that you could really, on social media, you can portray your life exactly however you want it to be. I mean, you could put a picture of yourself just smiling and having a good time with family and friends and laughing and all these things. And that's the image that can be portrayed to people on social media. But it's in person and deep down in the deep parts of the heart, that and right down deep inside, that is really where the true emotions lie. And so it's harder to cover, especially in person. But even in person, it's possible to put on a facade, or just put on a front. Or sometimes people are not necessarily feeling the need to completely show how they're feeling deep down inside. But even more important point of this is even when laughter is on the outside, the inside can still have sorrow, especially when one is trying to avoid or cover sorrow. And so there are times when there's a purpose for laughing and a purpose for being jovial, and it's meant to cover sorrow. At the same time, when it comes to issues that need to be dealt with in a person's heart and life, too much laughter can distract one from dealing seriously with issues. And so there is a time, yes, there's a time for laughing, but there's also a time that, let's say, for example, there are some people that go through life and maybe they're unbelievers or maybe they're believers who need to get some issues straightened out with the Lord. And laughter and fun and amusement, these things on the outside, are a way to kind of ignore that or avoid that. That's a point in time where laughter needs to be set aside, and there needs to be a time of getting serious to deal with issues, particularly a lost person. You know what? There are many lost people going through life with amusements, seeking after amusements, trying to just have a bunch of fun and crowd out maybe the harder things in life, maybe the things that would make them sorrowful. And at the same time, there is a point to having sorrow. There are different reasons for sorrow. And when there are issues that need to be dealt with, it's not necessarily a time for laughing at certain points of time in life. And so in the end of that mirth is heaviness. That, there are certain types of amusement, there are certain types of fun and laughter that really don't provide everlasting joy. And but when a person has a light heart, a heart that's been a heart of praise, a heart of that's been set free because of what Christ has done, and then a person can laugh, and you know what? can laugh, and it's a reflection of what's in the heart. But there are a lot of people, there's some people, I guess you could say, maybe have different senses of humor. I find that my sense of humor is different than maybe even my wife's sense of humor. So just because I might find something funny and she doesn't mean her heart is sorrowful. It just means she doesn't find it funny. For example, I found it very funny that on Little House on the Prairie that I grew up watching, and I don't recommend it now at this point, but I grew up watching that. And there were a couple times when Charles Ingalls would bust a chair over somebody's head. And so I found that funny, and what actually I found more funny is I would say that to my wife. This was shortly after we were married, or maybe even before we were married, possibly, I don't know. And she'd say, Charles Ingalls did not bust a chair over people's heads. Even if that's portrayed that way in the show. And so we're watching, this may have been before we were married. We were watching that after we were married, and we were watching that Whistler. Apparently they found Whistler movies funny. I didn't even know what Whistler movies were. What was Red Skeleton? Red Skeleton. Okay. Anyway, it was kind of an interesting movie. It was kind of funny. But had some plot, had a good storyline, I guess. But anyway, we're watching this, very early on in our marriage. And so we're going through, and there comes a point in time, a more tense part of the movie, and Whistler, is it his name, Whistler? Is that his name? I don't remember. The character, whoever the character was, whatever his name was, that Red Skeleton played, he picked up a chair and bashed it over somebody's head. And guess who was the one laughing the most at that time? And part of the humor was the irony of the already running thing about busting a chair over somebody. He said that was actually more funny than him busting the chair over his head to begin with. And so there is a time when there's different senses of humor. And same thing when I read a Babylon Bee article to her, a satire article, she won't laugh, and sometimes she laughs, but then there's other times but then I'll read an article and I'm just laughing, just finding the humor in it. So there's different senses of humor, but there are times when people don't laugh at things that really truly are funny, not because they have a different sense of humor, but because they have sorrow of the heart. And for a Christian should not live with perpetual sorrow of the heart or heaviness in life, that there comes a point in a time that you're able to laugh. Now, there are times when healing from things takes a lot of time, and so it's understandable that there are times when people are going through emotional healing and they have scars and wounds and things of that nature that do hinder that. But there comes a point in time as we go through life that we should be able to laugh a little bit more. Maybe sometimes people just need to loosen up or lighten up a little bit more, and just laugh at some things, and things that are wholesome, not anything sinful, and a lot of humor these days is dirty connotations behind it, but there's plenty of clean humor out there, and so. But there are times when people just simply don't laugh because they have too many things heavy on their hearts at that time, and that's a good indication we need to maybe take some things to the Lord or ask the Lord to help us with some things. And so just because there's laughter on the outside does not mean that there's not sorrow on the inside. I mean, there's a time for sorrow and grief in the heart. Grief in of itself is not a wrong thing, but too much heaviness and going on in sorrow through life can be too excessive after a period of time. But verse 14 says, the backslider in heart, speaking of the heart, the backslider in heart shall be filled with his own ways, and a good man shall be satisfied from himself. The backslider will face the consequences of his heart wandering from the Lord. So what does the backslider do? The backslider is one. Now there's times where somebody backslides because they just kind of strayed from the Lord. But then there are backsliders that they have an obstinate attitude toward the Lord, and they don't really want to get back to the Lord or get right with the Lord in some way. But there is, it says he shall be filled with his own ways. So in the backslider, he's going to go his own way, and he's going to be filled with his own ways. So whatever he decides to do, he's going to have to face those consequences. On the other hand, a good man shall be satisfied from himself. The good man experiences the satisfaction of being faithful to God. He experiences satisfaction as opposed to the consequences or being filled with his own ways. And yes, if someone is turning, rejecting the Lord or going their own way, that's what they're full of. They're full of their own ways and not God's ways. In verse 15 it says, "The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going." We had a whole message on prudence, but I'll just touch on this a little bit. The simple believeth every word. The prudent are vigilant. The prudent man looketh well to his going. It means he's diligent to be vigilant. It means he's cautiously looking, he's walking circumspectly, not as fools but as wise. And on the other hand, the simple, that's the foolish one, that's the one who is, there are different types of simplicity. Simplicity in just simply being gullible, easily impressionable, and then there's times where the simple then get more into foolishness because of their gullibility or being easily impressed or easily influenced. So the simple believeth every word. It's someone who you just tell somebody something and it could be even something really ridiculous and they just don't question it. They just believe every word. And but it says the prudent looketh well to his going. They're going to make sure that what they're being told is right. And that doesn't mean living a life of perpetual distrust of people. Don't get me wrong here. But there are times when we need to be watchful. We need to be vigilant because there are a lot of lies. There's a lot of deception in the world today. And so we need to be careful about what is being told and what we're hearing and believing. And it's once again the importance of truth and trust. The prudent man looketh well to his going. Prudence is the cautious exercising of wisdom. And so it's going forward, putting wisdom into practice, but with a dose of caution as well. And the prudent are vigilant, the simple are more gullible. They believe every word, being very, very gullible. Now that's not there's no place in the Christian life for lying to people just to make them look silly, make them look foolish. Now I try this at least. If I am joking with someone and say something that's not true, I try to make it pretty clear in the context or just in the way I present it that it is a joke, that it is something that is not something that's true. But it's important. There are some people who are really good at saying things just matter-of-factly that aren't true and that very easily people could believe and have reason to believe. So that's not necessarily being gullible. So there's a line between people being too gullible and someone just flat out lying that shouldn't be lying. And of things that are very believable. But let's be vigilant. Let's be prudent, and that comes along with vigilance and extra caution about what we hear, what we believe. In verse 16 it says, "A wise man feareth and departeth from evil, but the fool rageth and is confident." Now here we have two differing heart attitudes. We have a wise man fearing. Now what's the fear? The fear, well, certainly the fear of the Lord, Proverbs talks about. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But there's also perhaps a fear of what might happen to him if he allows evil to come into his life or does evil things. There should be a healthy fear of that. The wise man feareth and departeth from evil. So that should start with the fear of the Lord, but then after that there should be a healthy fear of consequences as well. But what's the heart attitude from the fool? Well, the fool rageth. What does the fool rage about? Well, the fool rages against what is right. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. The fool rageth against the God and the things of God. The fool rageth against the right path. And what does he do? Well, you know what? It brings confidence. The fool really is full of himself. So he's against the things of God. He rageth. He's angry at God. He's angry at the things that are right. But he's filled with his own self-confidence. And different heart attitudes lead to different actions, opposite actions. One being departing from evil, and then the other being confident, just going headstrong in their own direction. We should be wise. Once again, some of these things in Proverbs, it's not that you choose that this is the way you are. choose that this is what you're going to do. It's a byproduct of who you are. So you choose, I'm going to pursue wisdom. Okay, this is a byproduct of having wisdom. So a person might have the intention, I'm going to depart from evil. But if they don't have wisdom and have proper fear in their hearts, well, it's going to be harder for them to depart from evil. So there's certain things that are byproducts of the heart attitude. In verse 17, he that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. Now, I think I'm going to take next week probably and deal with the subject of anger. That's at least the plan, Lord willing, as God directs, based on this verse. And at times when we go through Proverbs, we come across a verse and I spend a week on that particular topic. And the subject of anger is a very important topic. If my recollection is correct, I don't think I've preached a message on anger since probably, it might have been a year and a half ago, or at least. Probably it's good to preach on anger at least once a year, because anger is a very important subject. But just for tonight, give you a little bit of a taste of this verse here. There's a contrast between someone who has a short temper and one who plans plans evil. I don't know why I said Israel. Plans evil. There's one who has someone has a short temper. He that is soon angry. That's someone who is very quickly angry. Someone who just can snap at the drop of a hat. It doesn't take much to get him really enraged. Now this word angry has to do with it's like when someone's wrinkling up their nose and their nostrils. That's what it has to do with being angry. Like you just do something happens and all of a sudden you can just tell they're mad. And what do angry people do? Well, they can be dangerous. They can certainly do dangerous things, harmful things. But people who are soon angry also do pretty foolish things. I mean, and how often does it look foolish for someone to get so angry and throw a little temper tantrum and throw a fit? I mean, it's just foolish. And so there are certain things that angry people do that you can kind of laugh at. I was thinking about when I was behind someone on the Mass Pike, I think last year. Don't exactly remember the time frame of this, but it's been a little while now. And the traffic was backing up. Actually, I think it was before they took out the toll plazas. Just had the gantries there for the electronic tolling. And so when you come up there on the Pike toward Boston, you come up to that 495, there was a big toll plaza and many lanes and cars coming and going. And so the traffic was backed up. So I was behind this guy and I was concerned about being on time where I was going myself, but somebody else apparently was, because we're backed up here at this toll plaza right near 495, and I'm behind a guy, and he's there. I can see through his back window, and he's just there pounding the steering wheel. So it looked kind of funny. It looked pretty silly. Now, was he a danger to anybody at that point? Well, not just in doing that, but it did look silly. It did look foolish to be doing that, especially from my vantage point. And I told my dad later on. He said, "Well, maybe he just had to use the bathroom. I don't know." I guess it's possible. He looked like he was just upset because of the traffic, and especially if you have to get somewhere, if you're going to work in the morning, and I think it was in the morning. But there are times people do things that just look flat out silly when they're angry. And you certainly hope they don't do anything more than that, but it certainly does happen. But what's more dangerous than someone doing silly things or being just quick-tempered is when they're actually devising evil. He that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. I mean, people look at the person who does something silly and foolish from being angry, and it's okay, well, they laugh at it. But the person who is especially looked upon with detestation is that one who devises wicked things, devises evil things. That is an especially dangerous person. Now, we'll cover the subject of anger next week, but to show you that contrast there, really complementary as well of these issues. And verse 18 says, "The simple inherit folly, I will say this. Let me say this about verse 17. Even when someone's doing foolish, stupid things because of being quick-tempered, is not a justification for being quick-tempered. So yeah, it might be funny, it might be silly, but anger that's left alone and not dealt with is going to turn into something much more damaging. So it can be funny for a while because of the foolishness and silliness, but then it can become more dangerous. But verse 18 says, "The simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge." And here we see another contrast with the simple and the prudent. Folly comes natural to the simple. It doesn't take much for the simple person to get into trouble. It doesn't take much for the simple person to find foolishness in their life or do foolishness in their life. But what's happened to the prudent? Prudent are crowned with knowledge. There is the prudent have an advantage because the prudent are looking well to their going. The prudent are paying attention. The prudent are vigilant. The prudent are using wisdom. And therefore have an advantage with the knowledge they have for living life to hopefully avoid some of the foolish consequences of life due to extra simplicity or other foolishness that comes along. And then verse 19 says, "The evil bow before the good and the wicked at the gates of the righteous." We don't see this happening all of the time, but we still see this in history. There have been areas where this principle has applied. And one is when you think about Haman having to honor Mordecai after, in the book of Esther, Haman hated Mordecai, and yet at the same time he ended up having to honor him. And Haman was the wicked Haman. Another one is a prophecy in Daniel. Keep your finger here and turn to Daniel chapter 7. We see a prophetic implication here. So there are some historical examples where this is true, but we know it's not true all of the time now. But there is, in a prophetic sense, it is completely true. Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. And here we have the prophecy of the 10 horns and 10 kings and the horn that rises out after them. And that is had some historical implication, but also major prophetic implication. It says, "And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." So a prophecy of the Antichrist here. Time is 1, times 2, and dividing of time, half a time would be the 3.5 years. And part of the tribulation period, time of Jacob's trouble. "But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." And so there we see that prophetic implication of Christ's kingdom after the devil tries to set up his kingdom with the culmination with the Antichrist, and even the wearing out the saints. I'm not going to be dogmatic on this because this is more of an implication or application in my mind. But I tend to believe, making the association, the spirit of Antichrist, and the Bible says the spirit of Antichrist is already in the world. Well, it says here about this man, he will wear out the saints of the Most High. So does it not fit? Like I said, I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, not going to make a whole big doctrine about this, but I tend to think this is true, that with the spirit of Antichrist in the world, that if the Antichrist himself will wear out the saints, then that is also the devil's objective even now with the spirit of Antichrist in the world, is to wear out the saints. Wear out the saints. Just grind them down, be pressing upon them, be opposing them. That's part of that spirit of Antichrist, and as we get closer to the time at that time, that's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Now I realize that from the time you're a child to you get to be an adult, your perspective can change a little bit. And maybe geographical location has something to do with it. But when I was growing up, compared to from when I was growing up till from the time being an adult, life feels like as time goes on, it gets more wearing. And it's not necessarily simply just, well, we have more kids, have a bigger family. It's just the culture we live in, the society we live in, it seems to be a more wearing life. And people are more worn down, they're looking for rest. They just, and times you feel like, okay, well, this is just a season of being worn. Eventually, things are going to kind of go back to the way they were. But yet, that's elusive. That doesn't happen. And I tend to think some of that, and some of that I think is, from a Christianity point of view, is that, in a church point of view, is that we live in the time of the attitude of the Laodiceans. And so that's going to add to the problems in wearing in from the Christian perspective, in the church perspective. But, if the spirit of Antichrist is at work, the spirit of Antichrist is grinding down. The agenda is to grind down the systems of this world so that the traditional systems of this world, so that the Antichrist system can rise up in its place. And that's why life feels wearing. That's why the culture feels wearing. That's why and of course, then when you're in a place where most people are opposed to God and the things of God, that is wearing as well. And so, we've noticed the contrast between, from the time we went to Connecticut, really, from the time we got to New England, from the contrast between a place where there are fewer believers and then a place where there are definitely more believers, a place that had more of a recent influence from the Bible and things of God. There is a definite difference in the feel of a place regarding that. And let me tell you, the place without the Lord, the place where there's more people that are living wicked, sinful lives in opposition to the things of God, that is a much more wearing place to be. And I think that's part of the spirit of Antichrist at work in just trying to wear out. But no matter what's going on around us, I just think the devil is at work with the spirit of Antichrist in trying to wear out the saints even today. And I like to use this verse here, verse 25, about thinking to change times and laws. That's why I like to joke, it's kind of a joke, that daylight savings time is of the devil and Antichrist because they're changing times. So that's more of a joke than anything. But you never know. Maybe we'll get to heaven and we'll find out. There will be no daylight saving time in the millennial kingdom. So. But of course we know in the new heaven and new earth there will be no sun anyway. So the Lamb is the sun, but the Lord Himself provides the light. But the wicked will bow before the righteous. That is the end of things. So no matter how wearing life feels now, no matter how much it feels like wickedness seems to be overcoming the world, overcoming the nation, just remember that is not the end of things. That is just the way it might be for now, because of things running their course. And I like what Paul says, that the outward man perisheth, the inward man is renewed day by day. So we don't have to live without hope. We can live with the expectation of the future and being renewed. And I'll tell you what, this morning for some reason, I just woke up, spent some time in prayer, and just for some reason I felt more renewed today than even just this past week. And I don't know why. I cannot explain one particular thing, but it's great to experience that, because I realize, what? A lot of times how I feel on the inside, much of that is my own thinking, my own perspective on life that has an impact on then my outlook as going forward. And so yes, the outward man perisheth, our bodies decay, and that's, our bodies get worn, they get tired, but the inward man can be renewed day by day, and that's how we all should, as Christians, want to live. Let's go to, or look at, back in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 20. It says, the poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich hath many friends. So we go looking at here the poor and the rich. And the way of the world, and it's just making a statement here, a matter of fact, is that the way of the world is to hold the rich in higher regard than the poor. So the poor is hated of his own neighbor, but the rich hath many friends. Why? Because, well, you get into good favor with someone who has the money, who might have the position, who might have the prestige, or maybe a little more to their name, and they're going to have more people that are friends. But at the same time, think about a neighbor who really doesn't pay much attention to the poor person. They're just kind of going on in life. Is there a double standard there? Well, certainly that double standard does exist in the world and in communities today. And even in James warned the believers about not showing preference in the church to a person who is well-dressed, well-attired, definitely a bit better off, and not showing preference to them, saying, well, you come sit in the front, but then having the poor person, well, you just need to sit in the back. There's a warning there. So that was even a temptation at that time, or may have even been going on at that time among those believers, which necessitated the correction and the reminder. But that's the way of the world. The way of the world is to hold the rich in higher regard than the poor. And who are the ones who are looked up to and idolized the most? Well, they're the ones who are considered in the world's eyes to be the most successful, and that usually has to do with material things and financially. But the right thing to do, as we see in verse 21, is to have mercy on the poor and not despise them. He that despiseth his neighbor sinneth, but he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he. And so there is a good thing that comes, good thing that happens in your spirit, your soul, when you have mercy on the poor, when you're not despising the poor, when you're not following the double standard that exists in the world, but that we, just as God is no respecter of persons as far as rich or poor, we should also not be a respecter of persons, rich or poor, based on what they might be able to do for us, or how we look to other people. If we spend our company in the time of rich people, that kind of makes us look good. We friends with richer people, that makes us look good. But you know what? What will people think if we're around maybe these type of people? People that are definitely more poor. They don't have as much going for them, not as big of a standing in life. But the right thing to do is have mercy on the poor. And verse 22 says, "Do they not err that devise evil, but mercy and truth shall be to them that devise good." So once again, here we have the word devise. That's the planning, that's the scheming, that's the setting things up or planning for something. And do they not err? That's to deviate from the right path, and it's being on the wrong path. It's the wrong path to devise evil. But it is, but mercy and truth shall be to them that despise good. And you know what? That keeps them on the right way. Those that devise, did I say despise good? I should say devise good. Devise good. When you devise good, if you plan for good, it's kind of a cycle. You get mercy and truth, and you're upheld by the truth of what God says and His promises, and that is enough to keep you going on the right path. You want more of that. You want to continue on. It's a good life. Experiencing mercy and truth is a wonderful thing, but it's a wrong thing. It's a deviation. It's a grave departure from what is right to devise evil. And then the last verse here tonight, verse 23, "In all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury," or that has to do with being in poverty. And so in all labor there's profit. Work is more profitable than talk. Work is more profitable than talk. But it seems like more and more there's so many talking heads in the world. You get online, you get on YouTube, everybody always has something to say. You get on Facebook, everybody has something to say. And I've thought of this a few times. That I've kind of caught myself, whether it's regarding Facebook, regarding YouTube, and there's things that are good to watch, good to look at, and we should consume the right things and good things, because we're going to be influenced by something. We should purposely consume what is good. But I thought when it comes to, definitely a lot of useless things that they're not producing anything, and I'm definitely not producing anything when I'm taking it in, I've had to ask the question, do I want to be just simply more of a consumer, or do I want to be a producer? Consumer or producer? And there's times we might catch ourselves, it's easier to consume than produce, because producing involves labor. Consuming doesn't involve, any labor. You just consume, it's just, think about if you're consuming information or entertainment, you can just sit there and consume it, a few clicks, it's very easy. Or if you're consuming food, you have to, well, I guess you don't even have to. A lot of cities now, you can get groceries delivered to you. You don't even have to go to the grocery store. So you can just get the groceries and sit there and consume it. If you're going to produce something, though, that actually involves some work. That involves labor. That involves effort. But what is more profitable? It says, in all labor there is profit. There's something that is being increased, something that is being gained by that labor. And that's one of the great things about our nation's history. And we think about both the great agriculture of our nation, the great building of different things in our nation. That's why I've had a fascination. We would go out to, in various times, travel. We'd visit my wife's family in Michigan. And we'd go on Interstate 80. You go on Interstate 80 out through, getting into Ohio, go past Youngstown, and right by Interstate 80 is the Lordstown General Motors plant, where they, now used to produce the Cruze. They just closed it down in March. But so they produced the Chevy Cruze there. And I'd always, as we're driving by, I'd be looking in just at wonder and amazement at this huge manufacturing plant. And I still do that. For some reason, if we go past an oil refinery, I don't care if it's an oil refinery, I'll just look at that oil refinery. Why? I think it's very fascinating because it's a monument to great production and it's not just a monument, it's used for great production in our nation. And there's something great in a nation full of consumers. That's the producers. And so the producers are the ones that there's the greatest increase, there's the greatest profit comes from producing, and that comes, it requires labor. It requires labor. And so if you don't remember anything else from this message tonight, just remember work is more profitable than talk. There is a time for talking, but what's more profitable? Work is more profitable than talk. And, talking's easier. So, but we need to work. We need to labor and produce more. And of course, for the Christian, all of our labor should be done for the glory of God and relying on the grace of God to help us, to strengthen us, to enable us, and for us to know what the right labor is that we should be doing, and that we can fulfill His will for our lives and accomplish what He wants us to accomplish.